Russell Kirk writes in his seminal work, The Conservative Mind, that the germ of public affections, in Burke's words, is to learn to love the little platoon we belong to in society. A task for conservative leaders is to reconcile individualism, which sustained 19th century life even while it starved the soul of the 19th century, with the sense of community that ran strong in Burke and Adams. Here, Kirk points to a key element in contemporary discussions of politics, economics, and philosophy. My name is Austin Dillon, and today I will walk you through two very different lenses of viewing the world: the individualist lens and the communitarian lens. And I'll explain how one of these lenses often chips away at the other, even though its own existence relies upon that which it seeks to destroy. First, we must define what we mean by the terms individualism and communitarianism. Stephen Skelet defines individualism as theories or attitudes that express commitment that the value and interests of the individual should take relative or absolute precedence over any other concern. And Skelet characterizes communitarianism by three precepts. The first, that a sense of ethics can only develop within some particular community or social context. The second, that people are social by nature. And the third, that living in communities is valuable. It's useful to examine the validity of each of these claims in turn. First, can ethics develop outside of a community? Many proponents of natural rights theory would say otherwise, instead postulating that innate rights to life, liberty, and property are understood by all human beings intrinsically. However, how can human beings realize these rights without them being relative to other human beings? In other words, can each human, on their own and without help from others, come to determine and respect the same understanding of natural rights? If so, then why are there any laws governing conduct? And why would those be necessary? Even the least restrictive understandings of law, such as Mill's harm principle, imply a social contract among other human beings to respect certain negative rights of others, and then to enforce prohibitions against infringements upon such rights. Moreover, completely relative understandings of ethics fall short upon application. If each individual is discerning for themselves, without consultation from others, what constitutes ethical behavior, then certain social decay will ensue. Again, without some shared understanding of rights or ethical behavior, order in society is an impossibility. Second, are humans social by their very nature? Aristotle would say, emphatically, yes. In his Politics, he writes, "And why man is a political animal in a greater measure than any bee or any gregarious animal is clear. For nature, as we declare, does nothing without purpose, and man alone of the animals possesses speech. The mere voice, it is true, can indicate pain and pleasure, and therefore is possessed by the other animals as well. For their nature has been developed so far as to have sensations of what is painful and pleasant, and to indicate those sensations to one another. But speech is designed to indicate the advantageous and the harmful, and therefore also the right and the wrong. For it is the special property of man, in distinction from the other animals, that he alone has perception of good and bad, and right and wrong, and the other moral qualities, and it is partnership in these things that makes a household and a city-state." So, for Aristotle, the ability of speech, which communicates right and wrong and distinguishes man from animal, inherently sets man apart as a communicative being created for interaction with others. Moreover, much of the individualist mindset also relies upon the existence and participation of other human beings. Take, for example, Adam Smith and the theory of specialization. There's perhaps nothing more individual than a minute level of specificity in vocation. However, specialization of labor requires participation of large swaths of people, and in fact, the more people involved in the process, the more specialized an individual another can become. So, it becomes clear that at some level, even the theory of individualism requires a prerequisite social body, a group of other human beings, if you will, a community. And third, is there value to living in communities? If ethics are unable to develop outside a community, and if human nature itself demands social interaction, then there is certainly value to living in communities. Perhaps more importantly, however, is the fact that communities provide a sense of belonging, an unquantifiable connection to time, people, and place. This connection is what allows for the morae upholding components of community, and it is what creates the reciprocal bonds of trust which help promote communal well-being. Communities create a life worth living for their members. All too often, however, the proponents of individualist ideology strike at the very heart of communities in the name of progress. A poignant example of such external forces trampling on the workings of community is discussed by Wagué in her TED Talk on Africa Post-Colonial Development, where she explains the effects of British colonial development in Africa, which, in effect, divided existing communities and hampered the long-term economic development of many African countries. Thus, colonialism created alienation from community in the African continent, and that's had lasting effects. In his work, The Quest for Community, sociologist Robert Nisbet discusses such alienation, and his words provide an articulate problem statement which embodies the core tension between individualism and community. He writes, "The historic triumph of secularism and individualism has presented a set of problems that loom large in contemporary thought. The modern release of the individual from traditional ties of class, religion, and kinship has made him free. But on the testimony of innumerable works in our age, this freedom is accomplished not by the sense of creative release, but by the sense of disenchantment and alienation. The alienation of man from historic moral certitudes has been followed by the sense of man's alienation from his fellow man." More succinctly, an increased focus on the individual has lessened the care human beings give to their communities, and it has consequently left many feeling alienated and in search of meaning. Individuals eventually seek to become more than just individuals, and to become part of something larger and more meaningful. Whether that's through traditional institutions like churches, or through more modern associations of identity groups, individuals will seek community. So then, the question remains, how do we rebuild community in the age of the individual? I would first challenge the assumption that we live in an age of individuals. Rather, I would argue that we are in an age defined by individualist thought attempting to return to community. Kimberly Crenshaw's discussion of intersectionality provides an excellent example of this phenomenon. Obviously, no two human beings will ever share all the same attributes, identities, or affiliations. Thus, human beings cannot all fit neatly into any combination of categories, thus pointing to each human's unavoidable uniqueness. However, Crenshaw's intersectionality analysis, as applied, often points to a broader search for community among those similar to oneself, attempting to replicate some connection to time, place, and people. C.S. Lewis writes that friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." This could be equally applied to community building. People want to see themselves reflected in others, and they actively seek out such validation of their own interests and experiences. However, the intersectional quest for community often comes up short. Of course, finding a global body of people who share some of one's immutable characteristics will breed a certain degree of agreement and mutual aspiration, but it will not necessarily provide the structured, localized support of a kindred community. A potential solution to the loss of community, then, is to attempt to bolster the institutions which originally provided sources of community. Nisbet points out family and religion as two specific examples, and Alexis de Tocqueville made similar observations upon his visit to the United States, chronicled in Democracy in America, where he remarked on America's strong communal institutions, like churches and clubs, which helped to sustain democracy itself. A return to these traditional sources of community has potential to reduce feelings of alienation and even to begin the unification of a divided country. But even after all this, you might still be left asking, isn't individualism what makes a community rich? That it is a combination of diverse individuals, each with their own interests, goals, and roles to play. And to that, I would draw a distinction between individualism and uniqueness. Uniqueness certainly does make a robust community, but individualism is not synonymous with uniqueness. Instead, individualism negates the importance of interests outside the individual, and that disposition is apt to harm the larger community. Uniqueness, on the other hand, appreciates the role of each individual in achieving the common good of a community, what Skelet defines as an aspiration, expectation, or hope that people will support policies and be motivated to make decisions by considering the interest of the community as a whole. But still yet, you might add, doesn't the invisible hand dictate that each individual, working in their own self-interest, benefit the larger society? To that I would say yes. Concern for community and the invisible hand are not mutually exclusive concepts. In fact, I would argue that they go hand in hand. Because man is a social creature in need of others for his very survival, it is often in his self-interest to act out of concern for his community, to preserve those vital bonds which are necessary to his own well-being. This is the difference between self-interest and selfishness, where one negates the importance of other human beings, and the other recognizes the vital role of community to the individual's flourishing. This has been Austin Dillon discussing Little Platoons, Individualism and the Quest for Community.